Okay, artists. So now for a brief overview of what we did in class and how to finish this. So today's exercise involves taking a piece of paper, could be a piece of printer paper, and just folding it over. You want to bisect it, getting two sections out of it. Now, on the other hand, you could just use your sketchbook and draw a line right down the middle of a piece of paper in landscape, which is the long way, like this, just so you get it pretty equally divided to sheets, okay? Once you've got that, on this side, you're gonna draw a cube. Not a square, but a cube. And you're gonna wanna make it large enough. So for the purpose of this assignment, make it slightly smaller than a fist, I would suggest. So, like a lot of you, I learned this little trick when I was younger, and you've probably heard it too. To draw a cube, you draw two squares. The second one being just a little up and to the right. Right, like so. And then you connect their corners. Okay? The next thing you want to do is erase those lines that are essentially creating an X-ray right through there. So we got our cube. Right? Not bad. And the next part is a little trickier because this involves controlling our hand pressure, a really crucial step to be able to get any value, any color, essentially, any gray we need from this pencil when we shade. So you're going to fill this in with one value, just one. And if the word value is a little confusing to you, when you shade with your pencil, you can get anything from light gray, a barely perceptible shift in darkness from the paper, to a pure black as you apply more pressure. This is all value, right? But when you shade, you might notice a little more pressure means, one gray here, all of a sudden a darker gray here. You can see it getting darker there. Darkest here. There's like 6 different values throughout that little adventure we went on with shading. We want one. And that can be a little tricky in particular when you shade like this. Sort of like the way a child colors with crayons. It's a little haphazard and rushed. And what happens when you try to blend with it, you can see the graphite is struggling, leaping over these valleys from one pencil stroke to the next. It can't quite fill it in because they're too spread out. So this is crucial. When you shade, you want to keep your shading tight. In other words, each pencil stroke, each up and down, is hugging the one just before it. Because that ensures that you don't have those giant gaps that your graphite is going to struggle to leap across. So you can blend for a smoother look, right? But you also have to make certain that when you're keeping it tight like that, you're also keeping the same amount of pressure. So now you'll notice it's getting more consistent than the last one I did. Because I'm trying to not press harder or softer, just apply the same level of pressure. And when I do that, bam, this is all one value. It's one gray, right? So I want to try to get one value across that whole cube, okay? So take your time, don't rush, and keep your pencil strokes tight as you shade. Now, you might still struggle with inconsistency. Maybe your pencil work is just even too dark. That's not uncommon. And it's particularly a struggle for people that have never had to really control the pressure of their hand before. particularly like athletes who are generally encouraged, the more pressure you apply to a sport or you're lifting, for example, the better off it's going to be all the time. But in this case, you might have to ramp it back occasionally. So bear this in mind. If you struggle, oftentimes it's because gravity and your strength just put so much force into the pencil like so. Wow, that's a smooth, consistent value too. But if you're a little too heavy-handed and inconsistent, consider this. The closer you hold your pencil to the base, the more leverage you get. Deprive yourself of that leverage. Instead, hold your pencil a little further from the base. Move your hand up. You cannot apply that same level of strength. Tip 2, well, rather than holding it like you're writing as well, not only move your hand up, but then tip it back, shade at an angle, and you'll notice you've got even more control and likely more consistent value as well. So I'm trying to stay consistent. I'm striving for 1 gray, remember. Now you can see it's a little patchy here and there. Now I can always go in and just lightly pull some of that darkness out with an eraser. And then add a little more and fill back in. When I'm done, I just clean up the edges and I've got my cube. Learning about getting consistent values and smooth, consistent shading is really important. But on side 2, if this is 1, this is side 2, we're going to do another cube yet again. This time, we're going to draw it as lightly as possible. That outline is going to be barely perceptible. And I asked why in my first time rolling this out to my Drawing 1 class. Why do we keep it so light? And I got a brilliant answer right out the gate. Somebody raised their hand and said, well, because we don't see outlines in the real world. And that's true. This cube is going to be drawn more realistically. This one was simply filled in. Right? That's simply filled in, as though with crayon, going from one border to the next with one value. This, however, is going to be shaded. And shading and filling in are 2 very different things. Shading tries to create the illusion of depth and dimension, a 3-dimensional object on a 2D space, in this case on a piece of paper. But to do that, though, we're going to have to make a shift from here. In Cube 2, it's not enough to just fill a single value in. Again, that's not shading. Shading means observing all the value variation. Where is it lighter and darker on a cube or an object you're observing? And then how do you duplicate that on the paper? The more value you observe, the more variation you put in here. If, for example, you notice it's lighter on the top, a little darker on front, and darkest on this side, well, you're one step closer. You're recognizing, even though we have, say, a gray cube, it's not all the same gray. I'm going to provide a reference picture for you, and I want you to do what you did here with consistent values, trying to really practice control and how best to hold the pencil to get the values you need from it. But your goal isn't to fill it in, it's to shade. So think about how your eye perceives objects in the real world. The only way you know something is 3-dimensional is because of light and shadow. You don't get confused when someone holds up a coffee mug thinking that it's a piece of cardboard. You understand it's a 3-dimensional piece made of porcelain that if they tossed it at you, you would instinctually reach your hands out to grab, right? because you know it's a solid object. But that's only true because your eyes perceive the light and shadow bending around it. You recognize it's lighter and darker in some places. In other words, your eyes recognize it has dimension. You have to trick the eye when you draw into believing that your 2D objects have that same dimension, because once you trick the eye, you can convince them it's a three-dimensional object. So that means the more value variation you have, the more you can recognize value changes in an image and duplicate it on your paper, the more realistic your drawings can look. So that's your goal for this second square. You don't want bold outlines. You do want consistency. You want to keep your pencil strokes tight, just like you did the first one, but this time, you are observing, based off the reference photo, as much value variation as possible. There could be light gray, darker gray, maybe close to a black, maybe not quite a black, but close to it. Apply more pencil pressure to get darker values, as you can see me doing here. Revisit, erase if you need to, build it up, but the more variation you have, the more successful the piece will be, the more convincingly three-dimensional you'll make it. And you do want to include a shadow, which you may notice, again, not wanting to oversimplify, may have more than one value or gray in it. Try to capture all the variation you see. I'm going to keep it here and let you finish your own. All right? We'll take a look at them in class, and if you've got questions, bring them with you. But let's see you do the best you can, moving from just filling in and instead evolving to shading. All right? You got this.